Hello, everyone. Once again, it's a pleasure to be associated with Amrop India's initiative of Leaders for Not What's Next. And in this series, focusing on the automotive sector, specifically in the area of technology, innovation, and product development, it gives us additional pleasure to introduce Dr. Martin Murray. Martin comes with a very strong, illustrious career with global OEMs like General Motors and in different roles in the US, China, Japan, and a small stint of interface with India before he headed back to start his own consulting unit in the area of powertrain, engine, internal combustion, and more recently in electrification. And he willingly came back to India to join Mahindra Electric Mobility as their Chief Technology Officer. Martin, welcome to this initiative.
Thank you very much. I look forward to our discussion.
Great. Martin, as you know, and all of us are aware of, that technology is changing the dynamic of our marketplace, whether we look at it from a consumer eye view or if we look at it from a corporate viewpoint. So it's touching daily lives, it's touching a lot of other things which we use in our daily lives. So keeping that as a backdrop, we wanted to get your perspectives on how do you see technology impacting the automotive sector, and more specifically things like digitization or artificial intelligence and such kind of stuff. So given that broad kind of perspective that you bring to the automotive world, it would be helpful if you can summarize that in some way for all of us to understand as to what are the areas that are getting impacted. Over to you, Martin.
Well, I think that the topic of technology is so broad, but it's very easy to see two channels that we have experienced very directly in the last year. The first is the very strong advocacy and the progress of electric vehicles. So around the world, in China, Europe, and US, these products and the concepts around the benefits of electricity as a fuel and using electricity for mobile transportation have just really become very embedded in the consciousness, not only of consumers, but of governments. And I think we're going to see the true transition into domination of the transportation industry with electrification. The second big trend is COVID has taught us how to use technology to be able to be productive in a different way, in a non-traditional setting where we spend less time together, but we have the same amount of challenges and expectations that we did when we were all in the former world pre-COVID. So technology has grown in both ways. All industries have been affected by COVID and the influence of the technologies we use now to communicate and get work done. And in the electrification space, perhaps we can go a little bit about how the people demands are influenced by this shift in technology.
Right. That's a good place to start, Martin, because coming from the Western world, coming into India, and you having seen a lot of developing economies like China, Southeast Asia, and so on, how do you see more specifically, and the entire purpose of this conversation is not to focus on the pandemic period, because there's a lot which has been discussed, written, and we are yet going through this. But on a broader basis, how do you see the automotive industry changing with the influence of things like artificial intelligence, digitization, and so on across the two key functions that you are associated with? Let's say bringing in technology, and that means technology by itself, and product development. So if these are the two, and the leading innovation part of it. So how do you see these technological changes impacting those functions?
Well, in terms of people, Ravi, I think there's really two very clear trends that have been revealed through the progress towards electric mobility. The first is that the traditional automotive industry now attracts and employs and seeks a lot of different kinds of technical backgrounds. So we have seen people come out of electrical distribution background, consumer electronics, and let's say the appliance areas, even some out of military, where these skills that were used for non-transportation reasons are now in demand and critical for the transition to electricity as a fuel. And the second thing is that leaders have to be ready to apply some of the traditional knowledge of the auto industry, which is unique to high-value consumer products, long lives, very wide range duty cycles and environments, and have to lead this new diverse group of technical people to be able to develop products that meet those needs and meet consumer needs. So you may have a consumer electronics background where your product life cycle was just a few years. Now you have a very durable product that customers expect to last 8 to 10 years or longer. So the leaders have to weld together these new talents and skills coming out of different industries and combine them with the kind of rigor and expectations of the auto industry. So it's a fascinating mix, and it's a challenge for both the technical people in new industries and for the leaders who are bringing these skills together to make great products for our customers.
Wonderful. I think you set the tone very well in terms of people and leadership, and that brings a thought to my mind to check with you. So when you set out making cross-functional teams, or when you do teams for your own operations, and we're not looking at anything confidential, but how do you see influence of all these changes and the multiple sectors from you bringing talent in? How does it impact teamwork and culture?
Well, I'll give an example, a very concrete example. We have, these new skills, and I'll use an example, say, of electronic conversion devices that take grid electricity and to convert it for use to charge a battery. And the language that these expert engineers speak is really new to automotive veterans. They just don't have that vocabulary. So there's a lot of trust that goes into having these experts make the decisions for the product. At the same time, Ravi, those experts, depending on the industry they came out of, may not have the experience with kind of the lead times associated with the procurement of parts and the validation of systems. So it takes a little bit of long-term experience to say we have to be organized in this way in order to be ready for mass production with quality. So there's a two-way street between a trust factor on terms and technologies that are new to some of the veteran leaders, and then a certain amount of trust from the technologists that these, we'll call them the old guys, do have some wisdom in terms of the discipline of execution. So that mutual trust is a really important element as we move forward in the technology in the auto industry.
And so obviously you must be facing some challenges because trust is something which is a very nebulous soft skill kind of thing, and chemistry, etc., starts working when people work together. But on a broader scale, from a talent perspective, you mentioned different sources that you're going to look at talent from. Do you see any challenges or gaps as a leader when you have such technological changes coming in? Do you see any gaps or challenges from a talent perspective?
I wouldn't say gaps. I would say that we have to be proactive and we have to be flexible to look for new sources. In my previous experience, we were able to get a lot of talent out of the industry that makes diesel electric locomotives, which wouldn't immediately be associated with electric cars, but in fact, a lot of the technologies are similar, at least in principle. So if we're able to branch our perspective and begin looking into these other industries for talent, I don't think we're going to find gaps as much as we're going to have to be a little bit patient and a little bit creative to seek out those skills that can actually apply to this industry and apply quickly. Because we really don't have time to grow it all up from the ground level. We're going to have to bring in talent that can kind of, we say, hit the ground running, but also be adaptable to the structure of procurement and validation and production quality systems in the automotive industry.
I'm adding a different dimension to the conversation, Martin, and you having worked for multiple, or rather in multiple roles at General Motors globally and now with another OEM here in India. Uh, the perspectives that you've given, would they be different for an OEM vis-a-vis an auto component player or a large component player versus a mid-size component player? Would the thinking need to be different? Would the challenge be different? What would your perspective be?
Well, there's some industries that have publicly worried that they say, well, what are we going to do in the future? Today we make crankshafts, and we worry that in 10 years we're going to be out of business. So maybe we should segue our capabilities, our equipment, our tools, and our people into making. I'll just make an example of electric motor parts. So these companies are looking at a transition of their product lines. That's one factor. Another factor is the so-called integration. The question in the industry, Ravi, is who is going to put parts together? And I don't mean just nuts and bolts, but if we think about a sensor or a sensing system on the car, should this be individually manufactured and sold to from a tier 2 to a tier 1 who integrates it to other devices, say a wire harness, then gives it to the OEM who assembles it in a car? Or should this device be completely part of a subassembly that is done through one or two tiered suppliers, and then it's given to the OEM as a larger device to integrate? And those breakpoints, I'll say, between tiered suppliers and OEMs are really under scrutiny now in terms of where can the breakpoint cause the most efficiency. It's easy to imagine a battery pack. Does the car company buy a pack? Does the car company buy a module? Does the car company buy a cell? Who makes these parts? So we see some different models, and we are making those decisions kind of on a daily basis. We think they may change as we learn, but that is a big factor in the automotive tiered supply industry, what role they're going to play in terms of integration of the existing systems and the new systems.
Yeah, that's interesting. The logic remains the same because even in the old world, if I were to call it, before electrification, you had a whole lot of component people making components and handing it over to the tier 1 system integrators who later on did a lot of JIT deliveries to the OEMs on their assembly line. So though the base principles remain the same, the shifts may happen between the auto component players by themselves and or with the system integrators. And so it would be interesting to see how the entire supply chain world, if I were to call it, between tier 2, tier 1 and OEMs changes. Uh, Last but not the least, Martin, all this requires a very keen sense of leadership, keeping an eye on the future or what the technology is going to bring in and the here and now, and the ability to marry that together. So what do you think are the key building blocks for leadership to succeed in this kind of a changing environment from an auto component or an auto OEM perspective?
Well, it's a great question, Ravi, and we touched earlier on this idea of trust.
Yeah.
If I don't know the details of some technology, I need to trust that the people I work with or the people I hire are going to be able to make the decisions that are best for the team and for the company. So I think that's a critical one. A second one is to find people who are open to stretching the idea beyond what they already know. Because all of us as human beings, we tend to gravitate towards what we know. And that even includes the next level of technology. If I am very familiar with this kind of motor or this kind of battery, maybe I just want to keep that because I know it, but it's best for the customer if I'm able to be flexible and maybe take a little bit of personal risk to support a new technology that I may not be as fluent, but has a better opportunity to give the customer cost and quality and performance. So leaders need to be able to trust, and they need to be able to, I'll say, let go of things that they're perfectly familiar with to embrace new ideas that's what's going to drive the industry and make companies successful.
And maybe leading and managing in uncertain times or changing times is something which will become far more important as technology impacts the industry, because this is not going to be the end of the continuum, just the arrival of the electric vehicle, I suppose, but much more is expected to be changed. What is your view on that?
Well, it's very interesting because if we look back, and I've been lucky to be in the industry for a number of decades, and there was an opportunity in the past to really grow your career based on your knowledge. So you could become a leader because you were an expert in engines, and your expertise, your deep and decades of knowledge was going to be a rock solid ticket to a leadership role. However, today, Ravi, it's shifted where your knowledge has a very short shelf life, and your ability to grow and to take on more responsibility is based not just on what you know, but on your demonstrated ability to grow and grasp new ideas and to help lead people make those successful. So that's the new leadership measure, is how fast you can grasp and apply, not how much you've picked up along the way. So that's not just my observation, but it's clear with my team and with my colleagues, and it's fascinating.
Very good, very good. Any other last perspective on people, leadership, and innovation from your side as a global expert in this field?
Well, I would say that we have seen the kind of, I want to say, explosion of interest in electric vehicles. And there are a lot of investors putting a lot of money out there, as you know. Anybody that says, I do EVs is bound to get some attention. And I think that the balance is going to be between the people that have the ability to grasp and apply new ideas, but also have a practical ground on reality and are able to understand how these technologies can really be applied in a reasonable period of time. So the mix between creative and forward thinking and practical, I think, will be the winning combination. And I hope we can see another generation of leaders develop with those kind of skills.
Yeah, fantastic. Great thought. And at the end of it, it has to spell success in the marketplace. So with that great summary, Martin, Amrop India thanks you for having participated on this initiative. It was great connecting with you once again and having this chat on innovation and transformation, etc. Best wishes to you and your family. Stay safe and be healthy. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you, Ravi. See you. Thank you. Bye.